Let's now listen to our guest. We will start with Dr. Brinda Mehta, who will talk about dissident creativity in writings from Gaza. She is the German Thompson Professor of French and Francophone Studies at Miles College in Auckland. Her professional interests include psychoanalysis, transnational feminist critical theories, and post-colonial Caribbean, Arab, and African literatures. Her most recent book, in a very long list of publications, Dissident Writings of Arab Women, Voices Against Violence, has served the theoretical framing of her paper today. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to thank the conference organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity to come to Beirut for the first time and to participate in this wonderful gathering. I'm truly honored to be here today. In my presentation, I will discuss the importance of Nawal Saadawi's theory of dissident creativity as applied to a selection of short stories written by women from Gaza. And Nawal, I dedicate my presentation to you. In a seminal essay titled Dissidence and Creativity, Nawal Saadawi highlights the ways in which Arab writers express their dissident discursiveness in instances of war, intellectual censorship, violence, and oppression. Her essay raises the following questions and concerns. How does dissidence as a radical praxis uncover the wounds that result from the normalization of violence in the necropolitical ideology of war? How do these writings give voice to pain in the women's embattled narratives as they embrace what Evelina Kat calls their femi-humanism as an informed ethos of living? In other words, how do Arab women writers stress the urgency of writing these violations through public condemnation in texts? These questions will be explored in a selection of short stories from Gaza Writes Back. These writings represent a counter-war cry, a ululation for survival, according to Sarah Hussein, that joins forces with Assia Jabbar's revolutionary, wild, collective voice. This collective screen is nevertheless inscribed in a landscape of loss as it looks for a sense of wholeness beyond the fractures of coloniality. Saadawi establishes the intimate synergies between creative thought and dissident action. She asks the important question, and I quote, "Does anything more than danger stimulate our creativity? And does anything and does anything threaten our creativity more than danger?" End quote. Saadawi describes dissident creativity as a dangerous activity capable of destabilizing the status quo through the search for alternative epistemologies. At the same time, this theory also stimulates important reflections on the role of the writer, who must give voice to what Jabbar calls the guttural, feral, non-submissive narratives that seek expression in discursive form. A Palestinian writer is often asked, "Are you a writer or a freedom fighter?" affirms author Ghassan Kanafani. Kanafani highlights the intimate connections between writing and fighting in a situation where the power of words and bodily resistance are graphic markers of endurance and a refusal to surrender to the imperialist agendas of Zionism. Similarly, Saadawi uses the Arabic term el-munadil to describe the dissident writer as an activist who joins a coalition of fighters in the battle for social justice. The authors of Gaza Writes Back provide an example of one such coalition of young writers that uses literature as a means to document their lives and experiences amid the inhumanity of occupation and Israel's repeated assaults on Gaza. The stories highlight the ways in which the everydayness of life in Gaza has been fractured and marked by a destructive politic, punctuated by, quote, "a series of very appalling days and altogether horrendous nights, nights of immense horror and fear," end quote. And this is a quote from the short story, Please Shoot to Kill. These nights of horror are pungent with the smell of burned flesh. This overpowering odor blocks the senses, making it, quote, difficult to breathe in confinement, end quote. At the same time, these stories also focus on the daily acts of survival needed to unoccupy Gaza through the ordinariness of a routine that nevertheless gives structure and meaning to life in an imposed cartography of death. The majority of the writers in this collection are young women who want to write Gaza through a gendered sensibility. Writing gives them a sense of ownership in the articulation of what Miriam Cooke would call the Gaza story that must include the voices of men, women, and children. And I quote, "As a Palestinian living in Gaza City, I have always believed that every Palestinian life is a story worth telling," end quote, states author Tasneem Hamouda. She thereby claims the Palestinian right to identity, humanity, and subjectivity. Hamouda underscores the urgency of writing as testimony to both chronicle and indict the ongoing devastation of Gaza by the Israeli army and Zionist politics. The stories are intended to provide first-hand eyewitness accounts of the devastation of Gaza through a poetics of creative dissidence. They emerge from the specific context of Israel's 22-day Operation Cast-led offensive against Gaza in 2008-2009 and foreshadow the recent tragedy of summer 2014, euphemistically termed Operation Protective Edge. How then do these authors write under permanent siege? How does creative dissidence assume an explicitly political turn amid rubble, refugee camps, squalor, and sensory deprivation, quote, without any electricity, any phone lines, any food? This is another quote from Please Shoot to Kill. How does writing both survive and transcend the Israeli blockade of Gaza by creating movable scripts that contest borders and boundaries? As stated by Hanan Habashi, another writer from the collection, and I quote, "It doesn't sound right that wars inspire, but it did in our case. In one way or the other, the war was behind most of the stories. Recognizing the vulnerability of our own lives in the face of the Israeli war machines, helplessness took hold of us, and writing pain down helped us realize the might of our words," end quote. Mighty words provide these writers with their best defense against the annihilating consequences of their siege, wherein words construct a vital narrative of lost or stolen memories in the form of a narrative scream for justice. In Gaza, dissident writing boldly confronts the fear of erasure by affirming the right to create in the face of death. Lead-produced bombs and missiles morph into lead pencils in an affirming life-over-death directive, whereby, quote, "I came to realize the power of the written word and the importance of having our voices heard. At this point, writing about Palestine grew out of the writing as healing shell and became more of a moral duty towards our just cause," end quote, affirms Habashi. In other words, these stories are part of a peaceful counterattack strategy to reveal the censored realities of Palestine in mainstream Euro-American Zionist discourses, truths that must be spoken by these voices from within in order to, quote, "heal some of the pain caused by the horrendous memories. And no matter how beautiful the spirit of resistance that overwhelmed us, this beauty should never override the ugliness of pure injustice," end quote, states author Samila Elwan. These multi-textured writings are layered with the painful grafting of bitter memories that nevertheless energize revolutionary texts. Telling the story thereby itself becomes an act of life, survival, and resistance. This trajectory of telling and witnessing is best described in Hedayah Shamoun's short story, The Taste of Coffee in Gaza. This story was written in the form of personal reflections on the 13th day of the 2014 Operation Protective Edge offensive. In this story, Shamoun compares the violated Gaza Strip to a deathscape of broken bodies, sensory alterations, trauma, and tragedy, wherein, quote, "war changes the taste of coffee, end quote. The reference to coffee is crucial given the vital role played by coffee in Palestinian cultural life, in daily rituals of hospitality, and in literature. And here we commemorate the memory of Mahmoud Darwish, the reference to coffee. As a signifier of national and diasporic identity, coffee symbolizes a sense of deep connectedness to the land in a ritualized claiming of memory amid territorial and political dispossession. Coffee provides sustenance to endure the trauma of loss. Its bitter grounds can nevertheless be sweetened by the taste of resistance to the negating politics of unhoming concretized by occupation. When war changes the taste of coffee, it imposes its usurping rights to dismember the Palestinian imaginary in Gaza, quote, when it wants to plunder what remains, end quote. The taste of the acrid coffee parallels the smell of burning flesh and the blinding smoke from continuous bombardment, quote, by those loaded Apaches firing over our houses nonstop, or one of those bloodthirsty, monster-like Merkava tanks, end quote. These targeted strategies to provoke death by bombardment, forgetfulness through asphyxiation, and vision loss through smoke toxicity lead to a profound alteration of the senses in a bitter power struggle to impair Palestinian memory. The bitterness of memory inscribes itself in the bitterness of Palestinian history described in terms of fragmented body parts and dispersed human remains in Shamoun's texts. Israel's protracted wars against Palestine represent its repeated attempts to thwart Palestinian efforts at remembering, revealed in the following incident at Rafah, and I quote, I hear about a young man from Rafah, and I cannot believe only his lower half has reached the hospital. The artillery shell divided him while still inside his house into two halves. The lower half reached the hospital the next day, but the upper one is still lost. The head, the chest, the back, and the hands have not yet left his house. A day is gone, and the body hasn't been joined together to be carried in the white shroud, to get a final farewell from his friends, or even just to be buried, end quote. The indignities of war and occupation create binary distinctions between what Judith Butler calls grievable and ungrievable lives. The ungrievability of Palestinian lives in the Zionist war machine condones their dehumanization in life and death. These dismembered bodies negate the wholeness of Palestinian history in images of historical, cultural, and physical truncation as a precursor to irretrievable loss and imminent death. These authors engage in testimonial writing as a form of witnessing. They affirm their right to memory when devastated landscapes, trauma, and shock are intended to erase primal memories through sensorial manipulations. They redefine the very meaning of the archive in the Palestinian context by initiating a strategy of what Beshara Dumani calls an archival democracy as part of the documenting process. The Derretian mal d'archive or archive fever takes on an explicitly urgent dimension for Palestinians who must not only document the past but also the present because, according to Dumani, they are still incapable of stopping the continued and accelerating erasure of the two greatest archives of all, the physical landscape and the bonds of daily life that constitute an organic social formation, end quote. The archive symbolizes a living, palpable, and recurring wound for these writers, a corporeal signifier of the historical dispersal of land and body through time. It cannot be limited to an elitist institution or confined to what Arjun Appadurai calls state-appropriated or manipulated governmentalities that negate the popular or vernacular dimensions of the archive found in the land, nature, the body, memory, orality, and communal history. At the same time, these writers also claim their subjectivity as intrepid bloggers and tweeters who decolonize borders in cyberspace. The electronic mapping of identity, place, and belonging in the so-called borderless world of cyberspace is a politicized act of creative dissidence wherein, quote, instant messages ignite revolutions, end quote. Instant messaging incites the call to revolution through the immediacy of action and reaction by never surrendering to pain or death. In the collection, the women are at the forefront of what I call archival cybertextualities. They take the lead in claiming cyberspace, knowing full well that the colonization of the Gaza story found in Zionist and masculinist narratives cannot be decolonized without their protesting gendered interventions documented in different forms. At the same time, cyberspace also invites infiltration and cooptation by reactionary oppositional forces like the government and the military, which is why these authors continually write and rewrite the Gaza story with urgent consistency to keep alive the so-called threat represented by their narrative insurgencies. Their cyber activism complements their revolutionary writings in texts like Gaza Writes Back to show how these young women endorse a different kind of witnessing and documenting located in the in-betweenness of the local and the global, what Nouvelle calls the glocal, as a form of planetary consciousness, a unique awareness of the interconnectedness and interdependence of struggle for and by Palestinians. This prismatic vision is located within the interstices of what they call, and I quote, a dream yet to be fulfilled. This Palestine that dwells inside all of us, end quote, they declare. These writers, in conclusion, write against their hands, as Hoda Barakat would state, to testify against and indict the politics of occupation. At the same time, they create memorable narratives that continually resist the occupation in their role as creative freedom fighters, Sadawi's cherished al-Munadil. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Masa al-Khair, bonjour. Thank you all for being here. We'd like to thank the conference organizers for inviting us. This is such a wonderful opportunity, and it's such an honor for me to be here with you all and to sit on this panel with such esteemed scholars. And so we're really glad to share our work and hear feedback from you. We hope that our contribution will really highlight women's creative agency and ability to work together in collaboration and share experiences across borders. And I think we've heard a lot about that today already. So I'm really hopeful that what we have to say can tie in to that. Just a note on the title. I chose this line because it's a line out from a song from Mayem Mahmoud. She's pictured right there, and she's the first Egyptian female rapper who wears the headscarf that I know of. She was on the show Arabs Got Talent, and she did a rap called Ana Mish Sigara, I'm not a cigarette. And the lyrics were saying, I'm not a cigarette, you can't put me down and step on me and put me out. And it was just all about women's rights and women's participation in the Arab Spring. But one line was, Sotik Ali min Zaman, your voice has been high from the beginning, saying that we've been participating in the revolution before the Arab Spring. You know, we've always been doing that. And I think we've been hearing that throughout the conference too. So I just wanted to give shout out to Maya Mahmoud, even though we're not going to hear her music today. There's just not enough time. But 19-year-old college student in Cairo whose music inspired me as well. So why women music collaboration? We're coming from this from a post-colonial, anti-colonial standpoint, and I'm understanding post-colonial not as after colonization. I think we're all still seeing the effects of that, but we're just using this term to refer to the struggle of knowledge production and power. We learned from Edward Said that post-colonialism talks not only about the knowledge about oneself, but the other. So it's a dual binary of I'm forming, I'm telling you who you are so that can also reinforce who I am, sort of. So we're saying that this music is a site for knowledge, new knowledge production. And also we want to look at female artists because just in general, women who do art are always under acknowledged and underappreciated. Also, Alejandra's work has dealt with creativity and collaboration, and that's how this became a collaborative project, and we decided to look at women artists who are collaborating. So I'm going to ask her to just speak a little bit about that creativity and collaboration. If you can reach it, sorry.
I can actually. So I'm just going to move this over, and then I will pass it to you, Angela. Thank you very much. And just like all the panelists and everyone here present, I am extremely honored to be here with you and humbled. And one of the best experiences so far is learning about your work and your perspectives and the controversial issues that have been discussed. You know, this is what it's about, and this is what I take back with me, is looking at the controversial issues that have been discussed so that we can go back home and find ways to not necessarily resolve them on our own, but learn more about them and make them publicly known where we're at. So the creativity part that Angela was referring to is regarding the ways that we come together and solve problems. So SN et al. Suggests in their article a post-Occidental globe. It's actually a question. It's a 2012 article. And they suggest that creativity in today's network society is not an irrational, impersonal characteristic of some highly talented, unpredictable, and extraordinary individual, but it is a very collective action that takes place in social networks. Ernesto Arias et al. Posit in their 2000 article, Transcending the Individual Human Mind, that because complex problems require more knowledge than any one individual possesses, these problems can only be solved by bringing the distributed knowledge, such as we have seen here, of diverse people together by collaborative design and irradiating a shared understanding among people with often controversial points of view.
Okay, so going from there, a bit about how we're envisioning women's voices from the Arab world fitting into other scholarship dealing with women's voices or feminism. I think in the past we've seen perhaps more of a feminist from the West, from a dominant perspective. We're framing ours in what's a growing body of research in the U.S. called U.S. hip-hop feminism, looking at specifically Black and Latino women's lives, lived experiences through hip-hop music. So many of us are aware of the misogyny and oftentimes disrespectful lyrics and characteristics that are in hip-hop music, but actually there's research suggesting that some lyrics are empowering, and also lyrics from female rappers. So we're just looking at how women contest or reinforce what's coming through the hip-hop culture. This also comes from the U.S. Third World Feminism, which is concerned with differential or oppositional consciousness of women, third world women in the U.S. And again, this is just terminology that's of the scholarship, and so this is why I'm just using this terminology. Also, this is coming from Michelle Wallace's Invisibility Blues, which is concerned with Black women's lack of visibility in popular media, film, and literature. So I was thinking if this could be expanded to something global, to other women in other parts of the world who may also be feeling marginalized, perhaps in their contexts, or marginalized by a global context. So our research question broadly is, how are women using networked and global communications platforms to collaborate and construct emancipatory imaginations? And we're going to be looking at two examples, a CD compilation project by 9 Arab artists, and then one song, and we're going to focus more on a song by a Palestinian rapper and a Chilean rapper. Before I go any further, I just want to address a few counter arguments which could come up, which I see myself. First off, how could U.S. post-colonial or anti-colonial music traditions, as I would call jazz and hip-hop, coming out of black immigrant experiences in the U.S., perhaps they've been used in diplomatic efforts and for fostering U.S. interests in predominantly Muslim countries. You can see Hisham Aidi's recent rebel music for this. So I don't want to not engage with that point. I think that's a very valid point, as well as the point that popular culture can also reproduce negative stereotypes in a group of people, and also perhaps global forms of music, rap music or hip-hop, reggae, or any other global form could possibly diminish local traditional music. So I think those are all very valid points that should always be on the table and discussed. But still, we'd like to contend that women can pick up on these forms and use them to address local issues and give voice as citizens and civic engagement in that way, be civic actors in that way. So the first example is this CD compilation called Sawtuha. It was just released recently in January 2014, and it's available for free online. It's a project that was put together by 9 artists from Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria. Just a bit more about it. It was released by Jakarta Record, which is a Berlin-based record label. And according to their website, the album was the result of a 2-week studio session in which the women put their experiences from the Arab Spring into song. Sawtuha is described as a refreshingly eclectic mix that combines Western-influenced hip-hop beats with traditional Arabic music. And it stands as an example of how hip-hop music can be used alongside more regional sounds from anywhere in the world to create music that is beautiful and new. The album cover, pictured here, depicts a pile of women, mainly women, a couple men, on a motorcycle driving towards a sign that reads Horiya, freedom. The album is constructed in online forms and is being represented as the soundtrack of women's experiences of the Arab Spring. So I just want to play a little bit of the first song of that one, just so you can get a hear of it, hopefully. I'm going to go to this file now. Moving on to the song that really I want to focus, I'll play the complete version of this song and do a quick analysis of it, hopefully, called Somos Sur. This was by the Chilean rapper Anna Tijoux and British Palestinian rapper Shadia Mansour, called We Are the South. I'm just going to flick to it, and I want to talk about the lyrics. We've handed out the lyrics. You can read along. Sorry, they're kind of small, but...
Tú nos dices que debemos sentarnos, pero las ideas solo pueden levantarnos, caminar, recorrer, no rendirse ni retroceder, ver, aprender como esponja, absorbe. Nadie sobre todos, faltan todos, suman todos, para todos, todo para nosotros. Soñamos en grande que se caiga el imperio, lo gritamos algo, no queda más remedio. Esto no es utopía, es salir de rebeldía, del baile de los que sobran de la danza de mi mía. Levantarnos para decir llevar. Ni África ni América Latina se suba. Con barro, con casco, con lápiz a atacar el fiasco. Provocar un social terremoto en este charco.
خاضع صار الوضع بده الردع لكل كتير بتحرر مستوطن بتلمس لكل مصاب تحت يد ألفان ألف راح بالهد هذا اللي عنان سلاحهم طيب تبركوه أما لما ألمي يدي برجع الواقع كما
All right, so there are three sort of measures that we could look at as post-colonial artwork, and that's counter-hegemonic, double, triple coding, emancipatory, and utopic visions. And so throughout the lyrics, they're saying, you know, we are the South, we put our hands together. In Spanish, they say, we want to free Palestine. And Mansour's lyrics refers to, again, freeing of the land. The Spanish lyrics refer to land freeing as well in Chile, in the South Chile. So I should have spent more time on this analysis, but I hope you got the point that it's a collaborating, working together, and they're both seeing similarity in their situations of free land, freeing the land. I think I'll just move on. So we just like, again, to say that these platforms of sharing together on such things as YouTube and SoundCloud allow artists to see each other's work and for people to be creative actors, and it revolutionizes civic engagement. And we also recognize that it's a resistance within constraints, and by relating their shared experiences, they're dismantling a single story of what it means to be an Arab woman. And we just also affirm that artistic expression contributes to a consciousness raising and allows for emancipatory visions. So thank you very much. I'd love to hear questions and feedback, and thank you again. Thank you to the conference organizers.
We will now listen to Dr. Miriam Cooke. She is the Braxton Craven Distinguished Professor of Arab Cultures and Director of the Middle East Studies Center at Duke University. She is editor of the Journal for Middle East Women Studies and author of an extended list of books focusing on the intersection of gender and war in modern Arabic literature, and on Arab women writers' construction of Islamic feminism. Her most recent publication is Tribal Modern, Branding New Nation in the Arab Gulf. In her paper, she will examine the works of Syrian art photographer Khaled Agil and the Egyptian women's art collective Women on Walls.
Thank you, obviously, to the organizers, but also thank you to the rest of you. I truly thought that by the time we came to this panel, that there would be 4 people left. This is an endurance panel. You know, this conference is unusually long. Yeah, I'm changing a little bit from the title and probably the abstract that I gave, and I think that often happens. I want to look much more broadly at the whole question of the role of men and women's representations of women's action, what is perceived often as non-action in war. And having worked quite a lot with military historians in my youth juvenilia, thinking that we could work together, which we couldn't, one thing that, in addition to the irrelevance of gender to war, the other thing was, of course, what's the relevance of intellectuals to war? And for those of you who know the Arab world, you know that intellectuals here have huge moral authority, that they have to be careful not to abuse or lose. And they have become, in many cases, the spokespersons of the people, the voice of a people who cannot speak. Very different, I think, from the situation of what we see in the US and in Europe. So I want just quickly to talk about what I think is absolutely crucial, is the role of intellectuals in a time of war. And that is the importance of the affect of violence. Now, we've had a lot in this conference on statistics, on what's happening to people, and it's as though it's coming from the outside. And I think what we're trying to do, at least on this panel, is to look inside. And that is to see what happens inside people when they're exposed to systematic violence. So that I would say, looking at the work of artists, writers, musicians, rap artists, is to examine the affect of violence. In other words, to look at the human element of what is so often dealt with as numbers, and so that we tend to disappear. We disappear people in the accumulation of numbers. And the reason that I think this is important is that the affect or the emotional responses to violence become their own reality, and a reality that we have to take into consideration when we're trying to understand situations of conflict. So I think of the ways in which women have been represented, not only in the Arab world, but elsewhere. But it is that my subject today is obviously Arab men and women's representations of women in war. And what I'm going to suggest, and I'll try to make the argument today, is that men and women have very different ways of representing women's roles in war. But I would say that in each case, men and women have at one end the victim and at the other end the heroine, and that men have a binary, so that between the victim and the heroine, there is a gap. But in both cases, the question of agency is sort of absolute. The victim has no agency, the heroine has too much. And to have too much agency, I will be arguing, is dangerous for women. To have too much agency in the eyes of men is dangerous for women. On the other hand, women work on the spectrum. So it is what I'm calling the victim to survivor to combatant / heroine intersectional trajectory. And the difference, the radical difference that I hope I will be able to persuade you of today is that in all cases of women's representation, there is agency throughout. Okay, so let me start just with a quick overview of men's representations. And as I said, there is a binary. There's the victim. And what is at stake is that women need protection against other men, and therefore men are empowered if they are the defenders. Now here is the work of Khalid Aqil, an extraordinary art photographer from Aleppo who's now in Istanbul. Some of the works that I'm going to be looking at are the works of Syrian refugee artists. And he has, there are these two images, but I couldn't get again the other image. The image I couldn't get, so I'll describe, is of, again, a naked woman. He's a fashion photographer, and he works with his models. And for them, and because I was very sort of conscious of the fact that he's using nudes, but as you notice, the way in which he uses nudes is very much sort of in the old masters style. And the one of Mufti Muhammad al-Arifi, some of you may know, he was one of the ones to recruit militia men, boys, to go to Syria. And part of what he was promising these young men was that they could have whichever women they liked. And so we've heard all the horrific stories that we need to hear about girls being made available for either the price of a cigarette box up to $1,000. And so the way Khalid presented this image was of a sort of like, an old master nude, and surrounded by exactly the same faces of Muhammad al-Arifi as a kind of Andy Warhol. And then here, if you see these women, again, victims, and these are Daesh. So you see Daesh below on the left, and then on the right, if you look, you can see that these men are staring in through the bars. So what he says about his art is that he wants his understanding of the situation and his grief for its victims not to be forgotten. And he said, art is different from documentaries because it lasts. The 2011 uprisings around the Arab world were obsessively recorded, but most of those images will disappear. Many already have, but art lasts. I fight this violence with art, and this is language that I have heard cookie cutter in many, many different places. So that's the victim, but how about the heroine, the way she is represented by men? And I would say that men exceptionalize individual woman's participation. Absolutely crucial that it's individual. And in the process, what they do is to deny the effectiveness of women's contributions as a whole, despite the fact that these women will actually protest. And for those of you who know about Jamila Bahraid from the Algerian War of Independence in 54 to 62, she was constantly being interviewed and, oh, you were such a heroine and you were so amazing. And she's like, no, I did nothing different from all of the other Algerian women, and yet the interviewers could not hear that. So, of course, what happens in the process is that this one singularized, exceptionalized woman becomes an empty symbol of the new nation. So we have this, obviously, after the French Revolution, Mariana. So, briefly to talk about a couple of heroines' stories told by men. First of all, Frantz Fanon, who I'm sure you all know, came up with this expression, stratégie femme, and he glorified Algerian women's participation in the war, even though they were unaware of how important it was. Then we have Pontecorvo, and this is the image I'm sure you will know from the Battle of Algiers, how threatening it is when women can transform themselves so quickly and easily and become more effective than the men. And so there's something that I refer to as the Medusa complex, and that is these women are really terrifying. Another example of heroine worships, here women as a group, Ala Awad, for those of you who are aware of what was going on the Mohammed Mahmoud graffiti street. And so the problem is that women who have been effective in times of conflict threaten. And so a reflexive reaction that we have seen is political disempowerment and, of course, control through violence, especially rape. So now I'd like to turn quickly to women's representations of the victim to heroine spectrum trajectory. And to say that, first of all, it's important to think about this as not being teleological. This is not first you're a victim and then you become a heroine. In the case of Algeria, of course, the heroines, as Assia Jabbar told us in many of her works, films and novels, the heroines became victims. Now, where I first came up with the idea of the transformation of the victim to combatant was in my work that I did here in Lebanon during the 80s, where I came up with the notion that women in war who start off feeling themselves to have been victimized at a certain point recognize that they have survived. And in having survived, they have conducted a kind of combat. This, of course, we see most clearly in the Dafa al-Gharbiyya, in the occupied territories of the Palestinians, where to be Samid, to have practiced Sumud, means you've stayed on the land, you've survived, and in the process you become a combatant. And what is at stake, and this was, of course, in feminist military studies of the 80s and 90s, the only person who can really be a full citizen is one who has the right to shoot a gun. So to be a combatant is the only way to be a full citizen. So, of course, in the Arab Spring, we saw women. We've seen lots of images of how prominent they were, and then, of course, we've seen the backlash, which came very often afterwards. When I was growing up in England and we would read stories about war throughout the ages, there was, I thought, one word, which was rape and pillage. And then it was only years later that I realized that rape was part of a strategy, something, again, that we've talked about endlessly. One thing that I have not yet heard talked about was how rape became considered a crime against humanity in 1998 with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, as a result of which I think we have new understandings that raped women are war victims with rights and that the combatants are criminals who need to be radically punished. So although there is still shame attached to a raped woman, as we saw in the film yesterday, there is a new idea of the absolute necessity to speak out. So here is one example that you all know of, the most visible one. So there we have the image of the blue bra woman, and here is what the women on walls did with that story. Women on Walls, a powerful group of feminist graffiti artists. We will not forget, what they've done to you. Here, again, the women saying, you have to control your sons, not your daughters, because there was a whole campaign to get women off the streets. You know, your women are in danger, get them off the streets. And they're going, no, get your sons off the street if they don't know how to behave. And here again, women on walls, girl power. Syrian women, Diala Brisley, and this doesn't show the whole image, but in the top part, she has written, I've got just a couple of minutes, she said, you can blow my body, but you can't blow the dreams of the Syrian people. So we're talking about artists, we're talking about people who have creative talent. How about those who don't? So I've looked in the past at Iraqi refugee women in search of a framed narrative, and they have used Zainab. Zainab, the granddaughter of the Prophet Muhammad, became an iconic heroine for Shiite women in the refugee camp of Rafah in Saudi Arabia. And in repeating her words in the Husseyniyat, it's the lament, of course, but it is also the words of defiance to Yazid. No, we will not submit to tyranny. And so I'd like to finish with Syrian women, and I wonder if I have just a minute to show this. So what I have found is that Syrian women who come into the camps in Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, who feel that they have been through an experience that no one can have words for it, because it's beyond. How do you articulate seeing your daughter being raped in front of your eyes? How do you see your husband killed before your eyes? And so what has happened, interestingly enough, is that Greek tragedians, so Euripides and Sophocles, have provided language for these women. Yes, let's start this.
انظري إلي وستجدين مأساة تمشي على ساقين. كنت أيتها الأم زوجة قائد عظيم. زوجته عيد.
يلا عيد.
وأنا صغيرة حلمي إني مثل. كنت ماني مصدقة إن الحلم اللي كان من أنا صغيرة إنه هلا رح يتحقق. لما أنا بحكي عن بلدي وماني حابة أطلع بهالصورة هاي كنت.
So, just to finish on the tragedians, obviously the themes in both Trojan women and in Antigone, and I gather some of you here in Beirut actually saw the Syrian refugee women put on Antigone in December, so if anybody has, I want to talk to you. But I think what is absolutely crucial is that in performance, and this for me is absolutely crucial, in the performance of the words of heroines, these women who came thinking that they were victims are able to embody the progression from victims to survivors to heroines. So in conclusion, what are the stakes in these gendered representations of women in war? Very crudely and shortly, I would say that there is a form of remasculinization and a restoration of status quo ante. And sometimes it's not status quo ante, but it is neo-traditionalism. And then for women, it's an empowerment of victims so that they understand that they retain agency even in the barest of life. They retain agency in order to survive. And in the process of understanding the ongoing agency, that they participate in the redistribution of social and political power according to their contributions and ability, with the goal of creating a just and equitable system. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to present to you over the next 15 minutes a recent study on the role of revolutionary songs in the lives of Syrian women living as urban refugees in northern Jordan. This is based on ethnographic research and interviews with over 50 women conducted over a 12-month period and the mobile phone playlists of 36 women. We also spoke to a number of men and children. We've spoken at this conference on the active role women played in the Arab Spring, and some have already mentioned how women who protested in the streets, many for the first time, have returned to their private world, either back into their homes or into neighbouring countries as refugees. We've also spoken about women's voice or lack of voice and their new forms of finding their voice, for example, through films and art and hip-hop and blogs. And we also heard about how a Palestinian prisoner singing a song to his mother was the catalyst for Regina to give up her armed struggle. I've been studying the power of song in a number of contexts for many years, and whilst in most instances across the world this involves actively singing and often writing and performing songs, in the case I'm going to present to you this afternoon, it's through listening that song has the power to change. I hope sharing this research will contribute to demonstrating the power of creativity, not just in giving a voice to the courageous creative artists actively expressing their dissent and emotions, but also to the listener the women who are back in their homes, caring for their children, coping with the trauma and anxieties, who have not yet found their own voice, yet whose listening habits are themselves a way of speaking out while remaining silent. So the research was conducted in Jordan between September 2013 and September 2014 by myself and Dr. Ruba Alakash, a Jordanian social anthropologist who's lived all her life in the border area of northern Jordan. I'm a visual anthropologist and ethnomusicologist, and you've heard about me, so I'll do my best to present both aspects of our research in Ruba's absence. So first, a little quick update on or information about the context, although I know a lot of you are aware of this anyway. This is the Jordan-Syrian border, and you can see here Irbid and Al-Ramtha, where we conducted our research, and Dara, where the majority of refugees in the region come from. Dara is part of the Horan region, as are Irbid and Al-Ramtha, and this border that you can see is relatively recent. All the women we met from Dara were devout Muslims, not used to leaving the home without a male family member. They remained fully covered with all those not direct kin and lived extremely private and isolated lives. Most of the women came from what we would call lower middle class households, where the husbands had been skilled labourers, electricians, shopkeepers and traders. And they had the means to leave the camps, but not to leave the area. And I've written a paper about that whole choice of leaving camps if anyone's interested. The women were from a variety of educational backgrounds, from those who had been taken from school before completing primary education and had been married very young, to those who were about to graduate from university at the time they had to flee Syria. About a third of the women were living in Al-Ramtha and the rest in Irbid. The majority of the women were in Jordan without their husbands. Some were widows. Only one of the women we interviewed was working, and she had to lock her children in the house alone for 8 hours a day to go and work as a domestic worker. The others survived on food coupons and occasional sale of their dowry gold. Their children would work if they could, and financial pressures were also relieved by finding grooms for the young daughters. For all the women, modesty and piety were core values that inform every aspect of their daily lives. The refugees we interviewed who were not from Dara came mostly from Homs, which you can see here up further north near the Lebanese border. And both Dara and Homs were known for their resistance to the Assad, are known for their resistance to the Assad regime. And all the women we spoke to had actively participated in the uprising. Most had lost family members to the conflict, and all had family members still active and involved in it in some way or another. So revolutionary songs were clearly extremely important during the Syrian Revolution and the subsequent war. And I've made a short clip with the testimony of one child, Mohammed, who demonstrates better than I how important these songs were and are to men and women and children at the time of protest.
والله سوريا من جارنا باصة صاروخ. مش فاهم. باصة صاروخ من جارنا. تحيا حمص العروبة، تحيا حمص العروبة، والخوف راس الدولة. كنا نطلع هيك مظاهرات، نطلع هيك وتعلمت منهم الأغاني والهيك. نحن بالثورة طلعنا مظاهرات، طلعنا هيك. عشنا بالسلم، كل يوم يرمى علينا الصواريخ وجارنا باس السارود، علمنا الأغاني وصرنا. أنا كنت أطلع وعلمني شلون أطلع من المظاهرات، خلاني قوي إنه لبداية الثورة. إيه وصرنا نطلع مظاهرات كل يوم، يطلعوا معنا بطيارات والله ملايين، عالم وناس ونسوان ورجال. فكنا مكيفين، كنا كل يوم نطلع مظاهرة وهيك كل يوم.
بروتوكولك عملتنا يا عالم شو عم تستنى.
مكيفين. كنا كل يوم نطلع مظاهرة وعلمنا الأغاني عن ليلة الحرية حانت، عن ليلة الحرية حانت، مشعب الطريق ومشعانت. بس لما صار يضرب علينا مدافع وصواريخ وهيك، ما عاد إلنا والعالم هربت، ما عاد إلنا نفس نقعد بسوريا. لهيك طلعنا من سوريا، بس كنا يوم هيك ما يضرب علينا وشيء. طيب إذا بنرجع، توعدنا تسمعنا، ماشي يلا اسمع هاي مطالبنا، ماشي يلا اسمع هاي مطالبنا. بدنا أصابع نصر، نرفعها فوق القصر، بدنا الصبح والعصر دويلة وجهتنا.
So if you want to see more of Mohammed, you can come. I've made a 20-minute video portrait of him. I'm happy to share it with anyone who thinks that might be useful in any of your work. So these songs, so important in the revolution, were generally written and performed by men. All of this large part was men, and there are the women on the side. So there were women in small numbers. And what we wanted to know is, did these songs reflect the female voice, and do the songs that they're listening to now also reflect the female voice? We did our research in two phases, and in the first phase, which I think I'll probably rush through a little bit, the revolution was still being called a revolution. This is between September 2013 and March 2014, and it was very, very present in the soundscape of all the women's homes where the television was playing revolutionary songs constantly. I'll just play a little bit of one, just so you get a...
كتايبنا امضي فينا من غدر الأعاد حمينا، كتايبنا امضي فينا من غدر الأعاد حمينا.
So that probably doesn't, that translation doesn't fit, but over the song, that was the sort of general theme. Freeman's armies keep going, retain your faith and insistence, we'll have our land back by blood. And also children's cartoons, likewise, very much themes of victory.
نصنع حلما ننسج فكرا من كل الأطياف، ننشر أملا نبني وطنا يتسع الجميع.
So, this was the spirit in the homes, and very much reflected in the listening habits of the women in the first phase. And these songs from the revolution were being shared by WhatsApp, which was very important, a little bit by Viber, but WhatsApp was the most popular, because the women very rarely left their homes. One girl hadn't left for 6 months, and many of them hadn't left their homes for 3 or 4 months. So those without data access on their phones used Bluetooth from other women who they occasionally met, or their sons went and gathered songs on Bluetooth and shared them. So there was a very important part of their behavior, or their listening practice in that time was these very fervent revolutionary songs of victory. When we returned on the second phase of the research, the songs had changed, the listening habits have changed. These songs were no longer really part of the repertoire. The televisions were no longer tuned to the Syrian channels, and the songs had also taken on a very different role. So they were more laments against the war, the killing, the imprisonment, the betrayal of the government forces, and some new songs about unwanted exile and separation. And I'll play you a couple of quick. This song was on almost every woman's playlist. Very, very strong lament, and I'll leave the words. I'll just come at it from where the tune comes in.
يا حافن يا حاف يا حاف أخ ويا حاف زخ رصاص على الناس العزل يا حاف واطفال بعمر الورد تعتقلن كيف زخ رصاص على الناس العزل يا حاف واطفال بعمر الورد تعتقلن كيف وانت ابن بلادي تقتل بولادي وظهرك للعادي وعلي هاجم بالسيف يا حافن يا حاف ظهرك للعادي.
And another one very quickly was from the perspective of the refugees. I'll again jump. This was very important because it was always watched with the video, listened to with the video. It's called Aini Hazina, My Sad Eyes.
شعبها مظلوم سوريا يا راسي مرجانة.
To the conclusion, there was one other track which I wanted to play you, which is on mobile phone ringtones. So there was one very popular one. These two were popular ringtones, but there was one other very popular ringtone. The mobile phones the listening habits had changed over the period of the conflict, from the communal listening of the songs of victory to the listening in private and often alone behind closed doors. Listening had become part of the private daily routine. As important as connecting to God through religious songs and Quranic recitations in the morning, the evening would be for connecting to Syria. The women would wait until the children were asleep, and then when they were alone, they would save their pain and tears for these private times. The mobile phones were clearly a necessity for these women and not a luxury. Most phones had the possibility of sharing data, which was also recognized as a necessity. Not only did the mobile phone serve as a point of contact with family members in Syria, but also to enable a participatory connection to the struggle. The songs act almost as a portal to home, as a direct hardwire to profound emotions otherwise too painful or uncontrollable to access. Listening to the songs alone at night, when the children were asleep, enables a controlled release of some of the pain the women carry and gives them a sense of connection with those still suffering in Syria. For an hour or two, through the songs, they give voice to their anger and pain and participate in the struggle for a better future.